Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, April 23rd, 2021. Income payroll tax evasion is picking our pockets, and it's costing us at least $1 trillion a year. We're all being victimized by thieves. And just who are these thieves? Well, they are the ever-growing number of people who are illegally evading their income taxes. Now, don't confuse tax evasion with tax avoidance. There's a big difference. Tax evasion is a federal crime. Tax avoidance is perfectly legal. Now, in a nutshell, tax evasion is intentionally not paying federal taxes that are legally owed. It generally involves deliberately underreporting income, claiming more or larger deductions and credits than the taxpayer is entitled to, or a combination of both. Examples of evasion are accepting cash or cryptocurrency as payment for goods and services, and then not reporting some or all of the amounts received as income. Claiming deductions or credits to which you are not legally entitled, or exaggerating the amounts of deductions and credits to which you may be legally entitled. On the other hand, tax avoidance is using legal methods to reduce the amount of tax you owe. Examples of income tax avoidance are contributing money to an IRA or a pension fund, or investing in municipal bonds where the interest received is not taxable. Judge Learned Hand, a famous federal appeals court judge from 1924 to 1951, wrote, quote, "Anyone may so arrange his affairs that his taxes shall be as low as possible. He is not bound to choose that pattern which will best pay the Treasury. There's not even a patriotic duty to increase one's taxes," end of quote. Now, Judge Hand's statement has been widely quoted by those promoting schemes to help people reduce their federal income taxes. However, the judge, by referring to arranging his affairs, was talking about doing it in a legal way, tax avoidance, not tax evasion. Now, most of us have come in contact with people who will offer us a product or service at a lower price if we'll pay cash. Now, some will even blatantly admit that their reason for wanting cash is that it lets them get away with not reporting it as income on their federal tax return. Now, of course, paying for a product or service with cash is not illegal, so in this case, the customer is not breaking the law. However, when the provider fails to report this income on a tax return, he or she is guilty of tax evasion. Now, rampant evasion is just one of the many problems with the income payroll tax system that the FAIRtax fixes. Now, no doubt there will be people who will try to evade the FAIRtax. However, in order to evade the FAIRtax, both the buyer and the seller must participate in an illicit deal, and both would be guilty of evasion if they conclude an off-the-record transaction. Now, evasion is not a victimless crime. Income payroll tax evasion creates either higher taxes on the rest of us or higher deficits if the politicians just keep masking the amount of evasion by borrowing more and more money. Increased enforcement will lead to more audits and often unsubstantiated assessments, not only against actual evaders, but also on the rest of us who are not trying to cheat the system. Evasion leads to less revenue for Social Security. Not reporting income results in lower payments of Social Security taxes, and less revenue for states as well, because people evading their federal taxes in all likelihood are evading their state taxes as well. Now, in March of 2017, the nonprofit National Tax Research Committee released a study prepared by Dr. Richard Sebula and Dr. Fiorentina Angelari-Daci entitled Estimated Future Tax Evasion Under the Income Tax System and Prospects for Tax Evasion Under the FAIRtax, New Perspectives. The study examined the amount of tax evasion as of the date of the study and also projected the likely tax gap for the years 2017 through 2026. Now, tax gap is defined as the difference between the amount of federal income payroll tax that's legally owed and the amounts actually collected by the IRS. Now, here are some of that study's findings. Our estimated gross tax gap for the period 2017 through 2026 lies within the range of $6.24 trillion, that's based on a growth rate that matches the average inflation rate, to $9.17 trillion, that's based on the historical growth rate of the gross tax gap. Furthermore, our estimates indicate that the average household will be assessed a de facto annual surtax that lies in the range between $4,276 and $8,526. That's annually and in current dollars, again for the years 2017 through 2026. This annual surtax will enable the federal government to raise the same level of revenue it would collect if all taxpayers were to report their income honestly and pay their taxes in full. Moreover, the estimated 10-year gross tax burden for the average household from 2017 through 2026 lies in a range between $46,623 and $68,328, and that's comparable in size to both the annual median and annual mean U.S. household income. Our estimates indicate that on average, in 1 out of the 10 years ahead, each household will be working solely to pay off that 10-year accumulated surtax, arguably a heavy burden for every American household. The study also introduces the perspective that tax evasion under the FAIRtax would be a complex and difficult endeavor, especially if tax evasion penalties were strong. It's shown that the transaction costs of tax evasion under a FAIRtax regime would render tax evasion a challenging and complicated undertaking, one sufficiently onerous that evasion efforts would be very limited. Now, when copies of this study were distributed to members of Congress and to scholars at various think tanks, the reaction was predictable. They rejected it all as just make-believe. They stubbornly clung to their belief that the study vastly overstated the income tax evasion problem and that the actual evasion amount was still nearer the $441 billion that the IRS said was the annual average between the years 2011 and 2013. However, on April 12, 2021, IRS Commissioner Charles Retting testified before the Senate Finance Committee. Among the points he made in that testimony were, the U.S. government is losing at least $1 trillion a year in unpaid taxes and needs more and more consistent Internal Revenue Service funding to go after tax cheats. The tax gap, again the difference between taxes legally owed and revenue collected, is no longer the last official estimate of a $441 billion annual average between 2011 and 2013, but it's now at least $1 trillion. New sources of wealth arising since then, such as trading in cryptocurrencies, are escaping taxation, and there is more evasion related to foreign-sourced income and abuses of business income passed through to individuals. He said legislation is needed to require that transactions in cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin be reported similar to the way that securities transactions are reported on 1099 forms. The IRS is outgunned by increasingly sophisticated tax evasion schemes, while years of budget cuts have left the IRS with about 17,000 fewer revenue enforcement staff than it had just a decade ago. And finally, the commissioner testified that President Biden's fiscal 2022 budget request would boost the IRS budget by about $1.3 billion, or 10.4% over current levels. The proposed $13.2 billion IRS budget would include an additional $900 million for tax enforcement in fiscal 2022, which starts on October 1st. In conclusion, now that the IRS Commissioner has opened the curtains and admitted to the rapidly growing tax evasion problem, the ruling class and their minions will try to make some changes, like increasing the number of income tax audits, and hope that the public will just simply not notice the real problem, that the income payroll tax system is irretrievably broken. Now, the only way to lower evasion without violating everyone's basic rights is to adopt a system that actually works better and protects our rights as Americans. In other words, pass the FAIRtax. Now, most of us really wouldn't object if the increased IRS audits targeted only tax cheats. However, people evading taxes don't indicate that fact on their 1040 return. Therefore, the IRS doesn't know who's evading and who isn't. With the mandate to stamp out evasion, there will need to be more aggressive enforcement across the board. And since the Internal Revenue Code is filled with general statements like business lunch or business trip that are not precisely defined, many small business owners and many other taxpayers as well will find themselves facing large income tax bills based on arbitrary assessments. Now, if there's one thing the ruling class wants to avoid at all costs, it's being held responsible for anything that the voters might get upset about. To that end, they are constantly trying to divert attention towards issues like corporations and the rich not paying their fair share in taxes. They stubbornly keep the income payroll tax system in place, but are constantly trying to shift the blame for all its problems onto others. Now, the bureaucrats seem to have an unshakable faith in computer models. They believe that anything that a computer model projects just has to be true. They cling to that belief in spite of the fact that nearly all of their computer models on the effect of tax policies have been wildly inaccurate. In 2019, there were about 30,000 IRS revenue agents responsible for collection. Now, the models apparently show that if you add 17,000 more revenue agents, bringing the total to 47,000, the evasion problem will be eliminated, or at least greatly reduced. But listen to this. There were over 253 million federal income tax returns filed in 2019. And they want you to believe that just 47,000 revenue agents are going to solve the $1 trillion evasion problem that's buried in those 253 million returns? Madness. Dr. Thomas Sowell is an economist and senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. His statement about bureaucrats really explains their all too often brain-dead solutions. Quoting, "You will never understand bureaucracies until you understand that for bureaucrats, procedure is everything and outcomes are nothing." End of quote. Can more agents and more aggressive audits greatly reduce evasion? Well, it can help. If you start putting people in jail and taking their cars and houses for back taxes, that will definitely send a message and make a lot of people think twice about trying to evade their taxes. However, history has shown repeatedly that when governments take more repressive actions, the oppressed citizens often revolt. Even the ruling class doesn't want to push us too far. The actual solution is for the ruling class and their minions in Congress to eliminate the income payroll tax system and replace it with the FAIRtax. Now, these are clever people, though. Even if we had the FAIRtax, the enormous amounts of money being spent in Congress would still afford them ways that they can profit at our expense. Sad, but true. But in that case, we would at least have a tax system that greatly reduces evasion, leads to more economic growth and prosperity for all, and protects our basic rights as Americans. It's time that Americans take control of their country by eliminating the income payroll tax system. No more gains that profit only the ruling class and their minions, the politicians. Enact the FAIRtax now. If you have friends who don't know about the FAIRtax, send them to FAIRtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. And then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the FAIRtax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.